Here we go. Yeah. This is my favorite part of the show. This ends when you say goodbye. There we go. Hiya.
Good morning, Timothy. Good morning, everybody who has just joined us on this Sunday morning. It is August the 4th here in Tokyo, and I believe in Katsuyama as well, where Timothy is now and he's going to report from. Thank you for joining us in the 182nd episode of Japanese Politics One-on-One. This is the 3.5 years. Well, we have been here unfailingly for 3.5 years. Timothy, thank you so very much for always being here to report and to tell us what the most important events in Japanese politics and also in Japan are. So I know that you're reporting from outside of Tokyo today again, and I'm grateful that yet again you stayed there, you didn't run away, and you're now with us. So thank you very much for this. I'll give it to you right now, and after that we'll do a plug for our sponsors as well. So
Okay.
Yes.
All right, let me just give you a heads up. Thank you very much, Maya, and good morning, everybody. Today is August 4th, 2024. As Maya said, this is our 3.5-year anniversary. Thank you very much for those of you who have stuck with us from the beginning. I think there's probably a crew of about 40 people like that. But also the audience has just continued to grow, and I think it's a consequence of just being consistent, always being here every Sunday and giving you the news that we feel is important to foreign companies that are doing business here, the diplomatic corps, people who are living here, just to be abreast of what's going on in Japanese politics. Some people feel like it's not their cup of tea, or they disdain politicians as dirty, filthy money grubbers, but politics is a part of society. It's a part of the culture. It's a part of being tuned in to what's going on. And we hope that our contribution helps facilitate your understanding and your journey into being more comfortable and more successful in this country. A lot going on right now, and I apologize. I'm in a different studio audience today. We got so many comments last week about the sunshine and the heat, and actually my phone shut down because of the heat, and I changed back into my car. But I'm sitting in the back seat now. The air conditioner is on. Hopefully we'll have no disruptions today, and the battery will hold out. But let me give you the upkick on what's going on in Japanese politics, and then let Maya have a few words about our sponsors, and then get back into the thick of it. If I glance over something that you have interest in, please just write Maya a note and tell her that you want a little bit more detail, or you want to have a discussion about any particular topic, because we can't cover it all. I try and keep this as brief as possible, but we just can't cover it all. The yen closed on Friday at $146.6 to the yen. That is so astounding. The yen has strengthened so much over a period of 1 month. It is just unbelievable what is going on in that market there. Unexpectedly, but by design, and the Prime Minister is working hard to bring the yen into more of a stronger position, so that Japan is generating more revenue from the products that they sell on the open market. Also, there was a tremendous flurry of activity. You might remember, if you tuned in last week, that Tony Blinken and Lloyd Austin were in Tokyo for 2+2, but it didn't stop there. It was a 2+2. It was also Quad. It was a lot of things going on there. The South Korean defense minister was also here. The Australian and Indian foreign ministers. These kinds of things, we talk about it, and then you begin to see what it means and what's the representation of what these meetings do or represent. You might remember when Mr. Kishida went to Camp David and met with President Joe Biden. Very soon after that, things began to happen on the military level and on cooperation, that sort of thing. And so this 2+2, immediately you begin to see things that are happening. And if you're not following it, it might just escape your attention. But there's so much going on militarily in this region. Japan and the Philippines had their first ever joint exercise in the South China Seas this week. followed by the United States and the Philippines having their joint exercises in the South China Seas. You know, there's a lot going on with the Spratly Islands and the Chinese insisting on fishing bans in certain areas, and then boarding or arresting some of the fishermen who are violating their self-imposed fishing ban. So there's a lot going on there. Also, Sado Island was qualified as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is a pretty big deal. This is something that the Prime Minister has been lobbying for quite a while, this process of becoming a World Heritage Site. Sado Island is known for the gold mine. You might not know, but probably you know, that there was a tremendous amount of gold that was produced there, and particularly over World War II. Like in other industries throughout Japan, laborers were brought from Southeast Asia and many from South Korea to work in these mines under really horrendous conditions. Many of them died because of the danger involved in it. But to get the World Heritage certification, the South Koreans needed to have an agreement with that. And the concession was that Japan in the exhibition would also talk about the contribution of Koreans in developing the mine and the treatment that they received. They did not use the term slave labor, which is what the South Koreans lobbied very hard on, but they had other concessions as well. Finally, there was an agreement. And now President Yoon is in a bit of a lame duck position. The opposition party holds the majority of the seats in his parliament, and he's criticized roundly. So any opportunity to diminish him or to attack him is something in the news, and he's being lambasted now for agreeing to this because they didn't use the term slave labor. So it's something that's going on there, but it is, I guess, good news that Sado Island is a World Heritage Site because it's a culmination of a lot of things. Plus, it's a representation of South Korea and Japan actually coming to terms and deciding something to move forward. So that's always good. The Prime Minister was in Tokyo all this week. He met with Taro Aso, his Deputy Prime Minister. You would think that's not such a big deal. Why is that in the news? He's his Deputy Prime Minister. He should be meeting with him all the time. But they had dinner. So this is something to be reported. It is also noteworthy that the previous evening he had dinner with his Minister of Finance, who is Mr. Shunichi Suzuki, who is also with the Aso faction. And of all the factions, you remember, they were all disbanded. Everybody closed their offices. They turned in the keys to the faction offices, except for Taro Aso's faction. So the fact that Mr. Kishida had dinner with the finance minister, his finance minister, and then the next day with Taro Aso is of note. There's a lot going on, particularly when Wednesday and Thursday the markets were just exploding. The yen strengthened, and then the Dow Jones fell. The Dow Jones and the Nikkei average fell tremendously. Huge news on Friday. I'll get into that a little bit more later. But the Bank of Japan also decided to raise their short-term interest rates. It's almost easy money, as we all have come to know, loaning out at a long-term interest rate of 0.1%. They now increased that to 0.2.5%, a big jump. The markets reacted immediately. And they decided, in addition to that, to reduce the number of long-term bonds that the the Bank of Japan purchases. And even with all things in the budget, the entire budget of Japan is financed about 27% by these long-term interests. That's the Japanese government basically funding itself through interest rates. The Bank of Japan has said that they are going to reduce their purchases, their monthly purchases, from 6 trillion yen to 3 trillion yen. That's a half. Over the next maybe 18 months, they're going to halve the amount of bonds that they're purchasing. In US dollars, that's $40 billion. They're going to reduce that to $20 billion per month that they purchase. and that supplements the revenue of the Japanese government. It's not really revenue; it's paying the devil later for what you're taking now. But it represents that the Bank of Japan governor, Mr. Ueda, who took over less than a year ago, is now finally beginning to get his sea legs. He's beginning to make some tactical choices, some decisions. The prime minister hired the fellow who was in charge of investing or pouring so much money into the market to prop up the yen about 5 months ago. And he's brought him into his inner circle, into the chief cabinet secretary's office. But there's a lot going on in that area, and the markets are pay attention to what happens on Monday. There's a lot going on in the United States too. The Japanese, when the United States catches a cold, Japan starts coughing. So this reaction, the decisions on the yen and also on the long-term purchases, is facilitated by what's going on in the United States. And so we'll get into a little bit more. I don't want to take up too much time on this before we get into the real details of it. But let me turn it back over to you, Maya, so that you can talk about our wonderful sponsors, and then we can get into the better details.
Thank you, Timothy. Yes, for the rundown, I cannot wait actually to hear the details about all those events and the happenings in Japanese politics. Before that, I would like to say thank you to Kanchu.com and James Howell. Kanchu.com offers bilingual services to individuals who want to buy and sell real estate in Tokyo and Yokohama. The company also does property management and investment property. To work with them, either in English or in Japanese, contact James Howell at james@kanachu.com or connect with James on LinkedIn. So also, please remember that Timothy, the star of this show, works and he's the CEO of Langley Esquire, a consulting company in government relations and public affairs. So they have been here for a while, quite more than 20 years. Is that
Yes,
true?
that's right.
Yes. Yes, so you're thinking about entering the Japanese market, and if you need permissions from the government or Kasumi Gaseki as well, do not hesitate to contact Timothy and his team. Okay, and with this, Timothy, I would like to once again turn it over to you so that we can hear the details about the most important events in Japan last week. Here we go.
Thank you, Maya. You forgot to give me that plug when you first started the show, huh? Caught you again. Ha ha.
Right. Okay,
Okay.
but
Okay. Whenever I can get you, I want to get you because it's so rare.
yes, can I say one more thing? To
Oh
everybody
God.
who is watching us, I know. To everybody who is watching us on YouTube or LinkedIn as well, do not hesitate to give us, or please do give us a like or a follow so that we know that you are there,
Yeah.
and these things are important to us. So remember to do them. And also, if you think that you find insights in these briefings, share them with friends and colleagues
Yeah.
so that they can benefit from them too.
Just say
Okay,
congratulations. That would be great because then we would be able to calibrate, how many people really like what we do and how many people really don't. So
right. Okay,
thank
Timothy,
you very
it's
much. Getting back to it, politics is heating up. The election for the president of the LDP is at the end of September. We talked about this for the last 2 weeks. The election committee has been identified, 11 members of the LDP, who are picked. In fact, Mr. Motegi was the chairman of the election committee 2 elections ago, so he knows what he's doing in this realm. The election committee has been established. They're going to talk about how the president will be elected, the timing of the election, how long the election is going to be. So generally, it's maybe 10 or 12 days, and they're thinking, since there are so many candidates, they suspect that there will be more than two candidates, more than three. Frequently, there are four. So the last election, there were four candidates. There was Mr. Kishida, there was Konotaro, there was Sanai Takaichi, and there was who else was there? The other female candidate, Noda Seiko. Um, uh, they have the first round, and the two winners of the first round batted off in the second round, and then the winner becomes president of the LDP and also assumes the role as prime minister. There's a bit of a process that goes on there. But this happens all at one sitting. They have the first election. If they have 5 candidates or 10 candidates, how many they have, the LDP all gets together. They have a vote. People who are members of the LDP also have a vote. They vote in the LDP headquarters. They count the votes. And if there's no clear winner in the first round, then they have the runoff. They take out the ones that didn't qualify. They select the 2 top runners, and then they have a second runoff. This all happens within a span of 45 minutes. And so it's a very active day, and so everybody's watching when that will happen. We suspect it will be on the 20th of September. That's, wow, less than 2 months away. And the positioning of the candidates, the potential candidates, is furious. No candidates have actually thrown their hat in. Even the prime minister hasn't said specifically that he's going to run. But we've got a pretty good idea of who the potential candidates are. And of this pool that I'm going to tell you about, you've already heard their names before. We can guess who's going to be throwing their hat in and who's not. But we have to watch what they're doing and what they're saying now. And I'm going to get into that. But the candidates right now are Mr. Kishida. He's obviously the front runner. Even his popularity is in the 20s. It's come up a little bit because we've been out of the diet session. The fighting inside and the controversies have died down a little bit. He's a little bit more prominent on the global stage where he does particularly well. We've got everybody coming into town, Quad, the 2+2. There's a lot of diplomacy going on. And as the longest serving foreign minister in Japanese post-war history, those are his chops. That's where he really shines. So his numbers have come up, depending on who you talk to. It's in the mid-20s, the lower 20s. But that's better than it was when he was in the high teens about 5 weeks ago. So he's in the running. There's also Mr. Motegi, who is the Secretary General of the LDP. You've got Kono Taro, who is also a hot contender. Ishiba Shigeru, who is, maybe this will be his 5th time running for prime minister. Sanai Takaichi is trying to assert her candidacy. We can talk about that a little bit. And then Koizumi Shinjiro, he's starting to come up. His father made a comment just this last week about his potential candidacy. But those are the main ones. I don't think that there's going to be a surprise candidate that jumps up. And as you know, every candidate, to become a candidate, in order to throw their hat into the ring, must have 20 endorsers. And last week we talked about Sanai Takaichi having her lunch meetings and not being able to generate more than 20 people to join her lunch meetings, and that indicates maybe she's going to have a hard time generating 20 endorsers. Getting 20 endorsements is a big deal. There are 360 odd members of the LDP in the upper house and the lower house, and getting 20 of them to vote for you, to endorse you, means that it means 2 things. It means they can't endorse somebody else. And number 2, it means that they have aligned with you. So if this candidate doesn't win, they're out. They're a bad guy. They're not a collaborator. They're not friendly. They endorse somebody else. So their potential position in a cabinet or in a choice position within the LDP diminishes as a consequence. So people are very, very delicate about make an endorsement. But let's say there are 5 candidates. That's 5 times 20. That's a third of the LDP membership needs to be wrapped up by different endorsements. That's a big number. So we'll probably figure this out. Mr. Ishiba said that he would announce after Obon. And we move into Obon. We're kind of in Obon now, but we move into Obon next week. We've got a 3-day weekend next weekend. And typically we move into Obon. That's when companies frequently take off a couple of days. So after that, we've got 2 more weeks left in August. It's usually the hottest time. Not a lot of business gets done. People are just waiting for September to begin. And that will be the time when people will start announcing. Mr. Motegi also said he will announce in September. Konotaro was deflecting the question about him running or not. And as I said, Koizumi Shinjiro, his dad, who was foreign prime minister, made a comment just this week when asked by a reporter. He said, if the decision is that he's going to run, I don't have any opposition to that, if that's what the decision is. And in light of the fact that 2 weeks ago, there was a discussion about this in a private dinner with several bigwigs, including the former prime minister, about his son. And he said he's not going to run. I would not endorse his candidacy. He's still a little bit young, but the general population and the population within the LDP is very excited about the prospect of Koizumi running and becoming LDP president. So there's a lot of excitement, a lot of anticipation going on there. People are reading the tea leaves very carefully, as we do here too. The other thing that's interesting about this election committee and when this election will happen is the Constitutional Democratic Party 3 years ago, when they went through their same party conclave to elect their president, clashed with the LDP. So they started their election campaign and it overlapped with the beginning of the LDP election campaign. And all of the news focused on the LDP race, and nobody was focused on the Constitutional Democratic Party race. And as a consequence of that, it had a long-term kind of debilitation to the Constitutional Democratic Party. They blamed the person who was in charge of that, the leader of the Constitutional Democratic Party, Mr. Edano, and they elected somebody else, Mr. Kenta Izumi, to be their leader. He's their current leader. So they definitely want to avoid that now. If the LDP is starting their election campaign on the 20th, the Constitutional Democratic Party wants to have, or has already said they're going to have their conclave, their election for their president, also in September. You've got 20 days. If it's 10 days or 12 days or maybe 15 days, it gives the Constitutional Democratic Party very little time to have their election campaign, where it doesn't do the same thing that it did 3 years ago. And to make things even more juicy, the fellow who ran the election campaign the last time and was dethroned by Mr. Kenta Izumi wants to become the leader again. So he's thrown his hat in. So Mr. Izumi who has already announced, he said, I'm the president of this party, and I'm going to continue, and I'm going to produce good results for everybody. Mr. Edano has come up and said, yeah, I don't know. I think I need another shot at this. And he's got support for it. You remember Mr. Ozawa Ichiro, probably one of the most brilliant geniuses in Japanese politics. He belongs to the Constitutional Democratic Party. He helped create the Constitutional Democratic Party. He's still very highly regarded. He's, a godfather of Japanese politics. He was, potentially prime minister material within the LDP before all the kerfuffle started. So he was consulted too about Mr. Edano and Mr. Izumi. And so when he gets involved, you can expect that there's going to be fireworks. So that was just on Thursday and Friday. So this next week is going to be really a time to watch. The LDP has been diminished by one member. Whenever the LDP or whenever a faction, when the factions were there, increased or decreased by one, it was a very big deal. This week, an LDP member resigned, and it's significant for a couple of reasons. But Megumi Hirose, who was from Iwate, she's been representing Iwate for the last couple of years in the lower house. She was billing the government for her diet secretary. So when you become a member of parliament, you get 4 paid positions. So if you fill them, you can have a policy secretary, you can have your number 1, your number 2 secretary, and you can have a private secretary. And she had a friend, I think it might have even been her husband, who was being paid the diet secretary salary, but wasn't showing up for work. Somebody caught wind of that, or somebody reported that to her. The public prosecutor's office did an investigation, very visible, lots of newspapers and cameras and that sort of thing. And she resigned, I think, on Tuesday. This is a pretty big deal for the LDP. They saw that she was running a little bit of shenanigans, trying to put some money in her pocket, trying to maybe feather her own personal nest by giving somebody a no-show job. And now she's out of the LDP. So she resigned from the LDP. She did not turn in her diet badge. If she is arrested, or if this thing goes on a little bit longer, she will probably turn in her diet badge. But you might remember this individual, because remember in the diet session, there was a diet member who was photographed coming out of a love hotel with a foreigner, a Canadian, who was a musician, actually. And this was reported, a lot was made of it, but it's the same individual, photographed coming out of a tryst or something like that. She caught a little bit of heat for it, I think, because she didn't show up for a committee meeting, and Bunshun was following her and reported that. So it's just the way of politics, and I don't mean to dwell on the underside of Japanese politics, but it is it's just a sign of how politics actually works with that many people and human nature being what it is. I hope you don't mind me reporting on that, but it is interesting and I think topical. Japan and the Philippines, they made an agreement maybe 4 weeks ago about reciprocal rights and stationing troops in their own countries. Like Japanese troops can be stationed in the Philippines, Philippine troops can be stationed and do training in Japan. This kind of reciprocal rights is taking on a new flavor. Japan has it with Australia, it has it with Britain, it obviously has it with the United States. It now has it with the Philippines. This whole thing that's going on in the South China Seas, in this region of the world, is just happening at such a rapid clip that you need to keep your eye on it, because it creates a flashpoint. We are in a flashpoint. Something could happen. Fortunately, North Korea has been very quiet these last couple of weeks, which we very much appreciate. We don't need any more. But at the same time, Russian and Chinese bomber aircraft approached U.S. and Canadian airspace last week in a show of collaboration. The first time for them to do that, and also the first time for these special, brand new, advanced Chinese bombers to be observed. So they scrambled jets, they went up, they took photographs of them, and they avoided the exclusive zones, so they didn't actually come and into contact with the exclusive zones of either Canada or the United States. But it was kind of a probe, and it's somewhat upsetting. Similarly, with China, with the Philippines and Japan doing their joint exercises 2 weeks ago, they signed the agreement. The very next weekend, they were doing joint exercise, the Philippines and the Japanese Coast Guard here in Chiba. I'm in Chiba, right outside the bay here. They were doing joint exercises right out here. And this weekend, the Japanese are visiting Manila and the South China Seas. They are near the Spratlys and doing joint exercises. It followed a similar exercise 3 days earlier with the United States. So there's just so much bubbling going on, and something to be concerned about. I'm concerned about it, and I think at least I'm going to continue to report on it, because I think it's significant. The Nikkei fell 6% on Friday. I don't know if you've followed that, but it is an incredible change in policy. Mr. Ueda took over the reins of the Bank of Japan less than a year ago, and has been somewhat calm and quiet about his movement. He's a different kind of banker than the previous governor for the Bank of Japan. And it seems like he's finally getting his sea legs. He's going to be doing things a little bit differently. The previous Bank of Japan governor was selected by Shinzo Abe, and he had been there for 2 terms, so he had been there for 10 years. Mr. Ueda now is beginning to establish his own policy. Clearly, he is a different kind of banker. He's doing things that probably would have been unheard of. The yen has strengthened incredibly over the last 2 weeks. It was at a huge weak point, $162 to the yen. It is now at 150. What was it? 146 dollars to the yen. That's a huge fall. But at the same time, the Nikkei has reacted as well, and it's fallen 15%. Similarly to the yen, the Nikkei was at its peak about 5 weeks ago. The Nikkei was doing extremely well. They had breached the all-time high, and now they're almost at an all-time low within the span of maybe 3 weeks, fallen 15%. This is the largest fall since 1987, which was the day after America's Black Monday. So this is pretty significant. The U.S. apparently is reacting to what they say is the false promise of AI generation and enhancement to the market. I think it's far deeper than that, but once again, when the United States market reacts, the Japanese market reacts in tandem too. There's usually a bit of a lag because of the daytime. But Monday will be an active day, probably Tuesday a little bit more. The markets open here before they open in New York, and they close, I think, before the United States open. So Tuesday will be a pretty important day for you to follow that. Motegi Toshimitsu Motegi is the Secretary General of the LDP. Interestingly enough, he was out of Japan the entire time this last week, while the Prime Minister was trying to beat his drum, involved in a lot of different things. Mr. Motegi was taken out. We had 2+2. We had a lot of military and business meetings going on at high levels. Mr. Motegi was out of the arena, maybe by design, but he utilized that to his advantage. He needs to burnish his image as a foreign policy maven, which he is. People probably forget that he was instrumental in the trade agreements with the United States. He touts it as himself as being, somebody who can be a Trump whisperer. He's dealt with the Trump administration, and he protected Japan in very tough trade negotiations. So he's promoting himself as, if there's a Trump presidency, then I'm the guy to be the Prime Minister of Japan in that instance. In any event, he was in Southeast Asia, developing his foreign policy chops, or at least displaying them and reporting from various capital cities in Southeast Asia. But it seems like he is really making, without just nailing it to the wall, that he is going to run for Prime Minister. It's delicate for him because he is the Secretary General, and the typical policy within Japanese politics is you never criticize the boss. You're not supposed to do that in any instance. But if you are part of the cabinet or a part of the administration, which Mr. Motegi is number 2 in the LDP, you shouldn't be campaigning. You shouldn't say, I'm going to run for Prime Minister. That's what the problem Konotaro has. He's Minister of the Digital Agency. He shouldn't be saying that I'm going to run for Prime Minister. It's considered rude and unpolitic. So Mr. Motegi was asked, are you going to resign before the election campaign starts? And he said, yeah, I don't know. So it's a double-edged sword. If he resigns from his position so that he can run for Prime Minister, and he loses being Prime Minister, then he's out in the cold and he's a bad guy. So it's very delicate. Of the 5 or 6 people that I mentioned as potential contenders for Prime Minister, you want to preserve your position to make another play. And I can't overemphasize how important this next year is going to be. There are going to be 2 national elections at the upper house and the lower house in this next year cycle. So the new Prime Minister will be overseeing that. So many people who are going to be running to regain their position as a member of the upper house or the lower house, they want to make sure that the prime minister is somebody they can broadcast. Yes, I supported him. He's the prime minister. I'm in the LDP. And if they stick with, I mean, just as a point of discussion, if they stick with Mr. Kishida and his approval rating continues to fall, then their enthusiasm for saying, yes, I'm in the LDP and I'm running for re-election and please vote for me, it's not as crispy and as shiny as, Mr. Kishida as the prime minister, rah, rah, or some new person is prime minister. A new prime minister in the position would really sparkle a lot of things, probably, immediately a brand new cabinet and a new administration, but it would probably spark a general election too, so that the politician who was in charge would say, I need the endorsement of the people to vote for me. Many people say that if the LDP runs an election, whether it's with a new leader or not, they're going to get their butts kicked because nobody wants to talk about the LDP. The scandal, the kickback scandal is still very fresh in people's mind. The Constitutional Democratic Party is on a bend to reestablish themselves. And then you've got Isshin no Kai, which is also trying to reestablish themselves. They want to be the number one opposition party. Right now, they're number two. Let's see, where are we? July, probably not news to anybody that's on this program, was recorded to be the hottest month in Japan recorded history. So that who knows what that means, but it certainly goes back 50 years in record keeping. But this July was recorded as the hottest, and the second hottest was last July. So July is a hot month. August is typically a very hot month as well, so we'll probably see a repeat. The Meteorological Agency has also announced that this heat is going to continue not through August. It's not going to end in September. It's probably going to trickle a little bit into October as well. So it's something for people to look out for. I'm protected today, as you can tell. I'm not suffering from the heat. I've got some hydration here because Maya yelled at me so much last week, but I'm good for the go. And so I appreciate everybody paying attention and listening in. If you've got questions, please ship them to Maya. And Maya, that's it for me. I'm happy to get into the Q&A portion of Japanese Politics One-on-One. And I so much appreciate, Maya, your creation of this platform and your whip cracking to have me show up with combed hair and brushed tooth every Sunday. Thank you.
And appropriate makeup as well.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Timothy. I appreciate you preparing for these briefings and delivering them every Sunday. Thanks a lot for that again. And before we dive into the questions and answers, also before I read the comments from our viewers today, I would like to once again do short mention of one of our sponsors. This is Houze Inc. Thank you very much to Houze Inc. For sponsoring our programs. So they also offer services in English and Japanese, and they offer renovation and also redesign and also home design for people who live in Tokyo and Yokohama in this area. If you are thinking about renovating your home or redesigning it or designing it, well, please do connect with Hana Urushisawa Howell at Houze Inc. Connect with her on LinkedIn, and you can find also their details, contact details in the description of the video on YouTube. Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you very much, James, for being our sponsors. And now we are moving once again to the questions and answer sessions. We have generated quite a few of those. Yuka, thank you very much for leaving your question on LinkedIn as well. Before that, though, I have a question to you, Timothy. We talk a lot about the LDP and the presidential election there, of course, because this is the party in leadership at the moment, the party in power, and what happens depending on what person they choose as their leader, and subsequently as the prime minister, there will be probably change in slight changes in the direction of politics and policy as well.
And policy.
And Paul, yes, we also sometimes talk about the opposition as well. And my question now is about the opposition. It is about the Constitutional Democratic Party of Japan. We know that they're going to have their presidential election as well in September. And well, there are two candidates at the moment. One of them is Mr. Izumi, who is the president at the moment. But we have also, well, there is information about Mr. Edano
Right.
that he's going to run for president. So my question is, whose chances do you think are better at securing the presidential seat there? Because we also know that Mr. Ozawa is not very happy with the current leadership. But could you please give us a little bit more information about this,
Sure.
if you don't mind? Yeah.
So one of the reasons why Mr. Izumi was elected was number one, Mr. Edano wasn't really very favorable, and there were a couple of uh, strategic mistakes that were made when he was the president of the Constitutional Democratic Party. Excuse me. Plus, they wanted a new face. They wanted somebody younger. And so they elected Mr. Izumi, who did a pretty good job, I think. Most people would say he did a pretty good job. And appealing to younger voters and having a fresher look at policy and how to assert and utilize the strength that they have as the number one um, opposition party. But maybe he's made a couple of mistakes, and also the younger members of the Constitutional Democratic Party are a little bit um, disappointed with him because they say, look, you're the young leader. You were elected to kind of bring freshness in, and you've ignored us, the Ichinensei or the Ninensei, who've been in the diet for one term or two terms. We're younger, we're under 40 years old, 45 years old, and you've really done nothing to promote us as, you know, prominent members of the party. You're just kissing up to the guys upstairs. Um, and so there's that going on, but also Mr. Edano met with Ichiro Ozawa. So that's a big deal. I mean, going to Mr. Ozawa and getting his blessing and then announcing that he's going to run means that Mr. Ozawa, Mr. Edano, who was the leader, it's going to be a tough race. I would think Mr. Izumi has the upper hand because he's the incumbent, similar to Prime Minister Kishida. The incumbent just has so much more power. It's hard to unseat an incumbent in this culture, in this kind of society, this political society. It has happened, and politics being as it is, you just never know sometimes. But my money is on Mr. Izumi. There could be another candidate that comes out who also throws his hat into the ring. But even if it's just one-on-one, Mr. Adano and Mr. Izumi, it will excite the population. You will get a decision and hopefully a coalition or a coalescing of people within the Constitutional Democratic Party to reassert its power. But that's the dream. The LDP wants to complicate that. So they're keeping everybody kind of on tenterhooks of how long this election campaign is going to be. So the Constitutional Democratic Party is really in a difficult position. They've already said it's going to be in September, and the LDP is playing with them. We might have a 15-day election campaign, and so it's all cat and mouse, and everybody's trying to, you know, confuse and to complicate the situation for their opposite parties. So there's a lot going on. But I think my money would be on the incumbent. But over the next 2 weeks, you'll really begin to see the positions crystallize. People will start talking about policy and why you should vote for them rather than the other guy. So we'll stay tuned to that.
Right. And we haven't heard anything either about Mr. Noda. So do you think that he might as well throw in his candidacy?
He was asked about that. He's probably, for observers like us, you would say Mr. Noda is probably even better because he was prime minister. He was in that very delicate period of time. Constitutional Democratic Party prime minister, and he wants to be leader of the party again. He himself has said there are too many people that dislike me within my party. So I understand where I am. I'm comfortable with where I am. I understand that some people are disappointed that I wasn't able to do better when I was prime minister, and they hold that grudge against me. But there are people that support me. But I'm not the guy to take this to the goal line. And I'm older, and I'm wiser, and I'm fine where I am. So he's unlikely to throw his hat in.
All right. Well, thank you for the insights there. So I'm moving to LinkedIn at the moment. So Yuka is on LinkedIn, and she wants to have your insight on this as well. So she writes, this is simply my impression, but it seems that in Japan, people are more excited about the Paris Olympics than the September LDP election. In contrast, in the US, people are more focused on the November presidential election.
Yes.
Why is there this difference? Could it be because the US has a representative democracy while Japan has a parliamentary democracy? Or is it simply a cultural difference?
Oh, that's a great question. I think what's going on in the United States is so varied. I mean, an assassination attempt. You've got Joe Biden, who is in the middle of the campaign, has stepped down. You've got Kamala Harris, who's talking about strategic diplomacy is because it's very strategic, and we have a president who understands the strength of diplomacy. These word salads that she produces. She's a candidate for president. You've got Donald. It's huge. I mean, what drama and what entertainment. It's no comparison to what's going on in Japan politics. There's no drama like that. I mean, the most uh, scandalous thing that I said today was about the member of parliament who's resigned from the LDP because she paid her secretary and didn't, it was a no-show job. I mean, in the United States, you've got stuff that's really, I mean, incendiary that captures the market. But also, I think with the Olympics, I sense that the Americans are not as hot on the Olympics for a couple of reasons. One is that maybe the American Olympic teams are not as dominant as they once were, but also the controversy about the opening ceremony. I think America being that kind of religious dominated society takes umbrage at that, and as a result shows their distaste or their disdain by just not participating as heavily. But the Japanese are not like that. The cultures are so very different. And yeah, I mean, you go to any shop in Japan and the Olympics are on. I mean, the Japanese wrestlers, the fencers, I mean, what a tremendous event for Japan. I don't hear the same thing with the United States, but once again,
Mm.
I'm not following it that carefully myself. I've somewhat lost the luster of the Olympics, as I think a lot of other people have, not just as a consequence of what happened in the Tokyo Olympics, but also just Olympics and these kinds of events and the Olympic committee and the money and the all the stuff that's going on there, the wokeism that just continues to come up. It's just, I think, maybe a sign of the times that people are just and sponsors too. Sponsors are fleeing from supporting or endorsing the Olympics too. So it's very delicate.
Yeah, and if you don't mind me chiming in here, I think that the controversy that resonated so strongly with Christian societies around the world did not resonate here so much. Once again, because Japan does not have this history of Christianity. It's not so strong. Of course, there are some Christian communities here as well, but not really that many, so that people would get up in arms with what was shown
Yeah.
during the yes during the opening ceremony. But Timothy, there is also one more thing. You were talking about culture, and also how people here are and also Yuka's question is that how people here are more interested in the Olympics, and how everything is, in every shop we see the TVs on and showing the Olympic Games. But also, this indifference towards politics here in Japan. We get mostly the senior people voting during elections, not so many the younger generations. And I think that I read somewhere that actually, was it the CDP or was it Ishin, that they want to pass a new policy where the parents of newborn kids will be allowed to vote on behalf of their children, which sounds ridiculous to me. But what is your take on this? Why now? Why? Of course, I can see that the interest in politics is not as robust as in the United States, for example. But isn't it crazy? How can you actually let the parent of a newborn child vote instead of the child?
Okay, so that's a very leveled question, Maya. So first
I
of
know.
all,
Sorry. Yeah.
first of all, children don't have a right to vote, right?
Hmm. Right.
You
Yeah.
have to be, at this point in time, 18 or older. So I think the idea is, yeah, maybe having parents vote for their children if their children aren't going to vote, or some sort of a endorsement or something like that. I don't know. I read that myself, and I thought that was just kind of flash in the pan. I don't think it really bears mentioning. What was the first part of your question, though?
The first part, oh, it was more of a comment that truly here in Japan there is very
Right.
little interest in politics, and it's mostly the senior generation, well, the Gen X and older, that vote in elections here.
Okay,
So,
let me respond to that, because I've been involved. When I was a diet secretary, I was involved in lots of elections throughout the
mhm.
entire country. The fellow who hired me was prominent in the LDP. He was prominent in the Fukuda faction, and he eventually became foreign minister. So on his path to becoming foreign minister, he hired me. I was just lucky that he selected me, that it was a unique situation. But as a part of my job, I went to elections all over the country. I was in the truck with the white gloves on, talking to, mentioning the candidate's name, that sort of thing. And I asked this question many times too, because the Japanese, getting the Japanese electorate excited about an election campaign or about a candidate is very different, culturally different than it is, at least in the United States, where I'm from. And I know a little bit about that, but other countries I can't um, very much compare it to. But for the Japanese, an election campaign is like a matsuri. That's how people treat it. That's how they enjoy it. That's what they like to do. They like to get excited. And at this season of the year, there's Bonodori, there's Nebuta up in Aomori, there's Tanabata, there's Kanto Matsuri in Akita. This is the season of Matsuri. And I think the politicians try to trigger that sentiment. You can't serve alcohol. You can't get people drunk. You're not supposed to do that in an election campaign. But that is a part of a component of having a matsuri, getting the girls out, getting the kids out, dressed in summer yukata, doing things like that. And it gets people excited. And as a participant there, as the person who holds the microphone that gets the claps, that also generates votes too, in a kind of a subliminal way. So, yeah, it is very different here. I think in the United States, it's almost a blood sport. It's not like in Taiwan or in Korea where it really is, but in the United States, I mean, particularly over the last maybe uh, four cycles, if you're a Democrat, you hate the Republicans. If you're the Republicans, I mean, the chasm between the two parties has become so stark. But you don't have that here. There are a lot of people that swing between parties. The swing vote is actually the largest block of voters in the Japanese population, and like in religions, people switch it. I like this person even though they're with the Constitutional Democratic Party. Everybody in my family has been voting for the LDP, but I like this person, or I saw them once, that sort of thing. So it's a very, very different dynamic. Great
Right.
question, though. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for that, for answering it. Yes, Yuka, if you have other questions, let us know. And to everybody who is watching, listening, please do not hesitate to share your comments and questions in the comment sections so that I can read them out to Timothy. So about the Olympics, Janusz in Clubhouse says, I'm in the US and we are all glued to the Olympics right now.
Okay.
Ryan, thank you very much. Ryan writes, from my perspective, there are certainly circles in America who care about the Olympics a lot, but as a percentage of news coverage, the news is very tuned into the political and Biden dropping out of the election campaign, and then it is injected a lot of vigor into the coverage. Okay, Biden's dropping has injected a lot of vigor into the coverage, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for sharing your, yes, your impressions. That really means a lot to us. And Timothy, yes, your thoughts on this as well.
No, I think I appreciate that. There are lots of different pockets. Maybe it was Ryan that talked about pockets.
Yes,
The United States is a multicultural. It's a huge country. It's got lots of different sections and dialects and people who speak differently in different parts of the country. It is just a wonderful mishmash of cultures, and there are different people all over Japan as well. But I think the dynamic of politics is quite different, and it's interesting. The question here, the national politics and the Olympics. Yeah, the Olympics happens. It's a very brief period of time, and then there's uh, the the other Olympics. What do they call them? Not the handicap Olympics.
oh, that's the Paralympics.
The Paralympics, yes, which are also very popular. And so the whole thing goes on for almost 3.5 months. But yeah, it's a very brief period of time. It only happens once every 4 years. It's a tremendous display of physical prowess and mental acuity and dedication and drama. Um, and I'm sorry, and politics in general lacks a lot of that. It doesn't have that kind of excitement and drama. Um, I mean, depending on what country you're from, but in our particular case, I think the United States and Japan, the two worlds are very different. But it's a great juxtaposition of politics and sports and who's watching TV and who's paying attention to the news. And the other thing that I have to say is that I hope I'm sure people in this program understand that the crystallization of mass media to manipulate the population is being more and more recognized. So many TV stations and talk shows are qualified not as news but as entertainment, and there's been a couple of court cases there. So they have been allowed to provide entertainment to their audience, couched as news or news coverage. So this kind of bleeding of I have a message I'm trying to impart to you, and I'm using the news as a way of infiltrating you. I think people are catching on to that, and so politics and also society, what people's vision of the Olympics, for example, or for the Olympic opening ceremony, is very colored by what's going on in mass media. So it's programs like ours, Japanese Politics One-on-One. People are finding their own sources of information. They're not relying on the main functions of media, CBS, NBC, Fox News, those sort of things. So I doubly appreciate that people tune in here. We try not to color it. We want to give you just the news. I can't help but, infusing some of my comments with my own political leanings or maybe interpretations. That's somewhat natural. But Maya and I really uh, go to a far length to keep it very balanced and neutral, and just to give you the news that we believe is important for you to know.
Yes, we truly live in a very different world of that, which was maybe 15 years ago, with the
Yeah.
social media and everything, all the information that goes out there. And of course, it is even more important nowadays to be careful who you source your information from, because of course, not only social media. What I wanted to say is that corporate media already lean
Yeah.
towards different sides, and of course, the coverage there is tainted. But it's important also when you are on social media to double check the sources of the information you receive there, because of course, there are a lot of reliable channels, and we try to be one of those. But also, there are people just who post things out there without much without much checks in the background and so on. Okay, so going back to the elections in Japan, so we have a comment from. Hiroko-san, and she says that the internet voting system should be introduced here as well. So I don't know, Timothy. Do you think that there are chances of it being introduced here anytime soon, or is it something that we need to think about at this point of time? What are your
Um,
thoughts on?
yeah, I think the marketing of that would be enhanced if it was vote by fax instead.
Well, but we
Um,
have that faxes are still very reliable here, right?
yes, they are, but
Unlike
yeah,
email. Come on, give me a break.
but 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 the point I'm trying to make is that
Yes.
technology has not really successfully embedded itself into Japanese culture
Mm.
and in Japanese society, and certainly not in the administration or in the bureaucracy or even in Japanese politics. Um,
Mhm.
um, if anybody's been involved in police work, for example, they do everything by analog. They don't use any digital. They use very few digital assets. If you're working with the police or investigations like that, it's really a very analog world. So that's somewhat um, prevalent in other areas, and I think just the the degree of security that the internet has in Japan, the phishing scams and the amount of money that has been pilfered through these kinds of internet scams. I think there's no strength or confidence that doing it by a vote would be any better. Um, so I think people will still have to show up at the local high school or at the civic center and make their votes on a Sunday, as we have been trained to do ever since in forever in the post-war history. And I think that's a part of the whole process too. A lot of people that you never see, the greengrocer, the people you might run into from time to time in the neighborhood Ofuro, you see them on election day. So it is something of a matsuri to go out and vote. But I think the internet component of that, it won't happen here. Japan certainly won't be a leader in that. It'll happen in some other country. Japan will try and embed or maybe copy or purchase the technology that achieves that at a very high degree of certainty, and then it'll change. But I don't see that happening in the next 10 years or so.
Right. So we've got Patricia who writes, I have been voting via online ballots for years with the US. Japan could get it done if they
Yeah,
make it secure. Yes.
yeah, I agree.
Yes, and also Hiroko-san says the number of younger generations will, people from the younger generations will increase definitely if online voting is introduced. And yes, so
Totally
Yuka,
agreed. So
yeah,
before we move on off of that one, the LDP is the power to dominate these kinds of decisions. It's the older people that prominently vote for the LDP. Getting the younger people involved in voting maybe doesn't suit them as greatly. I mean, the opposition parties would probably reap more benefits from easier access to younger people and being able to communicate with them via the internet, as you saw from the recent governor's election of Tokyo. So it might not be so beneficial for the powers in positions of power right now to implement that kind of new technology. So you got to keep that in mind too.
all right, yes, okay. And so Yuka writes, I think it's probably tongue in cheek. Okay, can we vote by darkening the circle next to the candidates' names rather than writing out
Yeah.
the names? I, for one, cannot write. You,
Yeah,
thank you for the laugh, indeed. Yes.
yeah, tongue in cheek. I think, yeah, part of it is writing it down. Um,
Yeah.
that's part of the
Yes.
process.
Part of the process. And I really think that well, basically, the system, the fax system here in Japan works, and it works for some companies, right? So if something works for them, who are we to actually push them out of using the
Yeah.
systems that work for them? So okay, and then Patricia, so we have to wait until the LDP dinosaurs die? That's her question. Well, we don't know that. But yeah.
So Patricia, you already know this. You're a Japan hen. You've been here for many, many years, and you know that change comes very slowly. Um, but yeah, the way power is distributed, it's very pyramidal. The older you are, the more credibility you have, the more people owe you favors and basically give you a wider level of discretion. And so maybe people call those in the upper echelon dinosaurs because nothing moves without their approval. It is kind of like that. I think probably they wouldn't like to be called dinosaurs, but I think your point is well taken that the reason why we don't move as quickly forward as we do in other countries is because the younger vote, the younger, more rebellious, more experimental candidates just never really have the opportunity to rise up. And I think that's one of the reasons why perhaps Konotaro has not been favored so positively. But on the other hand, Koizumi might be because you know he's he's not made any mistakes. He's been surrounded by people that have been protecting him and telling him how to act and what to do and say. Um, uh, Definitely, Konotaro is a bit of a maverick, and some people just don't want that. Let's stay calm. Let's go slowly. Let's check it out first. Let's have a committee. Let's go
Mhm.
through Ringi to figure out what we're going to be doing. And
Right.
you do avoid mistakes, but it just does take a long time. And also,
Mhm.
sometimes technology begins to leap you, and so you're left behind technologically because you've been so methodical about it. But I think the Japanese would prefer to avoid the mistakes and
Mhm.
go it a little bit more slowly.
Yeah, and there's well, okay. Oh, so sorry for this. But we also have on LinkedIn a comment, and it's very true. I think from Manabe-san, he says that digital literacy is very important, and also security has to be there, and maybe Japan still needs to work on this too, right? Because we have actually a lot of people here who have no problem voting their iPhones and smartphones and everything, but there is a large portion of the population that still struggle using
Absolutely.
smartphones and computers. So what do you do with that portion of the population, right, who cannot use the smartphones? So it's I think it's not as simple as it seems, and there are a lot of aspects to consider. When we think about introducing the voting system here, the online voting system. But okay, so with this, Timothy, it looks like we have actually gone through all the comments and questions, and probably I can let you go because I can see you're
Yay.
away already.
It's not that I don't enjoy this time with you, Maya, and with everybody else, but it's such a beautiful day today. I'm looking out on Tokyo Bay and the tip of the Yokohama Peninsula, and it's just beckoning me. So I have to go.
you cannot you cannot not do that, I know.
I cannot
Okay.
not do that.
Right. All right, and before we finish, before we say goodbye for today, I would like to say once again thank you to our sponsors, Houze Inc. and Kanchu.com, to James and Hannah. Thank you for being here, for making this possible, and also
Yes.
for yes, for being willing, to put your trust in us. So, to everybody who is listening to us, please be aware again that Houze Inc. and Kanchu.com offer bilingual services in Japanese and in English in the fields of real estate, buying and selling real estate, also home design and commercial property construction. If you are thinking about any of these, do not hesitate and contact James Howell and Hannah Uroshizawa Howell. So they're there, they're on LinkedIn, and they'll be very happy to talk with you and see how they can customize their services to make them fit your needs. Okay, and well, Timothy, that's all for the moment. To everybody else, thanks again for being with us. And we are going to be here once again next week on Wednesday, no, first Wednesday, yes, at 8 o'clock in the morning, when we're going to talk about a topic related to doing business in Japan, and then 8:20 on Sunday next week again, when Timothy will report from somewhere around Tokyo. We don't know where yet, but well,
That will
let's.
actually that will be part of the 3-day weekend. So definitely I will be in some crazy place wherever the wind takes me. But I will be broadcasting from some safe harbor at 8:20 on a Sunday morning, in the middle of what is it, Mountain Day, the holiday on Monday, but
Yes,
also
holiday
as we move into Obon.
Obon as well. Okay, great. That's all
Thank you,
for the moment.
everybody.
Thank you. And oh,
Woo!
see you on Wednesday first, and then next Sunday.
Thanks, Maya.
Thank you, Timothy. Sorry for yes surprising you all the time.
Never stops.
Never.